Okay,
My pleasure.
another question. Will you discuss the average point gains associated with some of these study tips or study plans that you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, one of the things that bothered me the most about the work I was doing with these rich kids is that it actually does work. We get this impression that the test is you can't prep for the SAT or the ACT. And if you talk to your parents, that's probably the philosophy they had when they were younger. Now, kind of the nation is caught up to what these rich kids knew for a long time, that you can prepare for it. The thing to keep in mind is the test is standardized, which doesn't mean that it's like normal. It means that the test results follow a bell curve, and they try to get as many students as they can to get the average score. And the average score on this test is to get 500 on each section. What that means is if you are scoring below average, so you're in the half of students that are getting below 500, you will go up really quickly if you are an extremely low score. So if you have 300 on a section, it will just take a few more questions and you'll shoot up into the 400s and towards 500. And same with the very highest scores. So if you're in the 700s on a section, one or two questions will radically change your score. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. If you are at 500 or near 500, you are at the average score. Your prep is not going to show at first because it might take two questions to get 10 more points to go from a 500 to a 510. And that's going to feel like you did a lot of work to sort of get your skills in place to get those few more questions, but it's not showing yet. So just be prepared to be frustrated in the beginning. Once you get momentum and you get out of the 500s and you get into 600s for your score, then you'll start to see rapid score increases. One more question might mean 20 points more on your score. So just keep that in mind and guard your heart in the beginning of the process if you are around the average score, because those are sluggish to move. But once you get momentum, you'll shoot up through the 600s and 700s. And so it's often only at the very end that you're like, oh, it's all paying off. So just be ready for that. If you are a really high scorer, you have to kind of resign yourself to probably taking the test more than once, because any one math concept that came up that you weren't ready for, that you missed the question, that can take an 800 to like a 770 really quickly. And then one more question is a 750, like it shoots you down. So you just have to be ready to have a really a wide range of results when you take this test if you're an extremely high scorer.
Yeah, and I think your advice just highlights and underscores again the importance of really practicing and taking time to make sure you begin preparing early enough in the process so that you
Yeah,
have time to guard your heart and eventually see those gains the way you'd hope to see them.
I was going to say it's a long range process. So you have to be ready doing the work in September that might only pay off in May, which is a really hard thing to do mentally, but it's a good thing to get in the practice of. Like you're taking a long range view, right? The other thing to think about is the SAT is a much longer exam than anything you've ever taken in school. Even AP exams will max out around 2 hours. The SAT, you're looking around 4 hours by the time it's all over. And if you have extra time accommodations, you're looking at 6 hours. And so that takes practice. It's just like cross country runners know. You can't get good times for long distances unless you're running long distances. So that's part of why the practice tests work. Beyond anything you're learning question by question, your brain is just getting used to what it's like to sit and focus for 4 hours, which you can't just decide to. Your brain really needs to train itself to do that.
Yeah, and I really like that you highlighted the trying really hard not to get discouraged as you go through this process, because even if you don't adequately prepare for the first test, you have all the time in between the first test with more information to prepare for another time that you'll take the test. So I really appreciate that advice. So as I was saying, you can tell students to take all this time to prepare over and over and over again, but oftentimes life happens and kids just don't find themselves with that much time. And I know you touched on it a little, but can you dig in a little bit more for the top 2 or 3 things a student can do overall, or maybe in each section, the best ways to make the most gains if you had just a few days to prepare or less than a week to prepare?
In this situation, you're probably feeling just sweaty under the armpits and panicky, right? Like, oh no, this huge thing is coming up and I don't feel ready. Um,
Yeah.
so the number one thing I need you to do is to get really familiar with how the questions are asked. So you need to look at a printout of an SAT or an ACT, if that's what you're taking, and look at what the rules are for the questions. So you're not wasting time on test day trying to figure out how these questions work. I need that very base level you must have. Also, keep in mind for the test, its timing matters a lot more on the SAT and the ACT than it ever does for a school test. School tests are designed to be finished in the period. Sometimes, you get stuck and all of a sudden you're rushing at the end. That gets exaggerated tenfold for these standardized tests. So I want you to have a sense of what timing is like for you. Are you able to finish your reading sections with no problem? In which case, you can just casually go through and answer question by question. If when you take a practice section at home, have you found out you're only able to get like half of the questions done by the time time was called? That's going to really change the way you take this test. I need you on the reading sections to actually get to the last question every time. So that if that means you have to become reckless and you have to speed through and not read the passage first and just answer questions, they give you a line number, you go back and you find an answer that looks pretty good, and then you put it down and you move on. If that's what it takes to get you to the end of the section in the time, that is the right way for you to be taking that section. Obviously, students who don't have a time crunch shouldn't be skipping the passages. They can afford the time to go and look at them that way. So you really need to internalize the timing. On math, if you're not able to finish your math sections on time, that's not a huge deal because math does go from easy to hard within its types. So if you have a multiple choice section, the first one's going to be the easiest, the last one's going to be the hardest. If time is called and you didn't get to the hard questions, that's okay. You're not expected to get them right anyway if you're an average student. So it's fine to just keep moving until time is called. This one difference is the one in which you have grid-in sections where you put in your own answer choice and multiple choice. Each of those individually go from easy to hard. So if you get to the hard multiple choice questions, make sure you give yourself time to work on the easy grid-in questions because every question counts for the same number of points. So you want to make sure you've seen all the easy ones. And then, as far as your test-taking experience, it's really, really crucial on both the SAT and the ACT that you have something bubbled in for every question. So you really, even if you're just prepping this the day before, this is probably the one thing that could save you 50, 100 points on the SAT. If there's only a minute left in the section and you have 12 questions left and you're like, oh man, I'm in trouble, stop doing questions and just start bubbling. Chances are you're going to get 1 in 5 of those questions right, which is just extra points if you just put A. And no, there's no one single letter that's more statistically correlated with correct answers. They're pretty evenly distributed. So just pick a letter and just go with it and just put it all down. That's if time is about to be called.
Sounds like putting together a test day plan is another good idea. I remember one of my favorite quotes is, "A problem well defined is half solved," and that sounds like what you basically said. Just really make sure you understand the elements of the test and you and how you interact with the test in order to half solve the problem before you actually tackle any of the questions. Thank you so much for all the help with study plans and support plans.